UFOs. A top-secret document filed by the FBI in 1949 tells how three different men each reported seeing a UFO breaking up in midair.
Imagine driving down a lonely canyon road. The radio is static. Suddenly, the night sky turns into day. A massive fireball erupts over the peaks. You think it is a plane crash. You call it in.
The document reveals that they were miles apart at the time, and each one of them say they saw the UFO explode over the mountains in Utah.
But when the recovery trucks arrive, they aren't looking for survivors. They are looking for metal. This happened in 1949, and the falling object that the FBI described didn't just disappear, it went underground. Literally. This is the story of the crash that history tried to delete. The Sardine Canyon Incident. It was a cold night in April 1949. The mountains around Sardine Canyon, just north of Salt Lake City, are rugged and unforgiving. It is the kind of place where sound travels fast, and lights can be seen for miles. But on this specific night, the lights were not coming from a town or a car, they were coming from the sky. A cable was sent on April 4th. It was marked urgent. That is not a stamp the FBI uses lightly. It was sent directly to the Bureau Director, J. Edgar Hoover. Now, Hoover was a man who wanted to know everything. If a leaf fell in Washington, he wanted a report on it. So for a memo about flying discs to reach his desk, it had to be serious. The document reveals something terrifyingly specific. It details the accounts of three separate men. These were not random people. They were not looking for attention. One was an Army guard. One was a policeman. The third was a highway patrol officer. These are men trained to observe. Men trained to keep calm in a crisis. And here is the catch. They were all miles apart when it happened. They did not know each other. They could not have coordinated their stories. Yet their reports matched perfectly. They each described a silver-colored object. Not a light, not a blur. A solid silver object high up in the air. It was approaching the mountains at Sardine Canyon. It wasn't drifting like a balloon. It was moving with purpose. And then, chaos. The memo states that the object appeared to explode in a rash of fire. Imagine standing in the dark looking up at the peaks and seeing a metallic craft detonate. The flash would have been blinding. The sound would have rolled down the canyon like thunder. But it wasn't just one bang. Several residents in the area reported seeing what appeared to be two aerial explosions. This implies a sequence, a malfunction, or maybe an attack. Following the explosions, the witnesses reported a falling object. This is the key detail that changes the narrative from a simple sighting to a recovery mission. If something falls, it lands. If it lands, it can be found. The FBI took this seriously. You have to understand the context of 1949. The world was on edge. The Second World War was over, but the Cold War was freezing over. Everyone was watching the skies for Soviet bombers. But a Soviet bomber is a plane. It has wings. It makes a specific noise. This silver object had none of that. The memo regarding the Sardine Canyon incident is part of a massive release of documents called The Vault. For years, these papers gathered dust in secure archives. Now we can read the raw data, and the raw data says that the Army and the police saw a craft fail and crash in Utah. But why Utah? Sardine Canyon is difficult terrain. It is full of nooks, crannies, and caves. If a silver disc or a piece of one fell into those mountains, retrieving it would be a nightmare, unless you knew exactly where to look. The document mentions that the object was high up. This suggests it was traveling at altitude before the failure. The explosion in a rash of fire suggests a fuel source or a power plant breach. Weather balloons do not explode in a rash of fire. Meteors do not look like silver objects before they hit the atmosphere. They look like streaks of light. This was a physical machine. The witnesses were adamant. The urgency of the cable proves that the agents on the ground believed them. You do not wake up J. Edgar Hoover for a shooting star. You wake him up when something crashes in your backyard that you cannot explain. The crazy part is the silence that followed. Usually, if a plane crashes, there is a massive public recovery. Pictures in the paper, funerals, investigations. But after the Sardine Canyon explosion, the official story went dark. The local papers reported the lights, but the follow-up investigation vanished. It is only through this unearthed memo that we know the FBI was involved. They were tracking the witnesses. They were compiling the data. They knew an object had gone down. We have to look at the date again. 1949. This is 2 years after Roswell. The government was already in panic mode about flying discs. They had already issued and retracted the press release about the captured disc in New Mexico. They were desperate to keep a lid on this phenomenon. So when a second major crash happens, this time in Utah, they arguably had a protocol in place. Secure the area, silence the witnesses, bury the paperwork. But they couldn't burn the memos. They had to file them. The description of the falling object is crucial. It implies that the main structure survived the explosion, or at least large chunks of it did. Gravity took over. That metal, whatever it was made of, hit the earth. Did they find it? The memo cuts off without a conclusion on the recovery. It states the sighting. It states the explosion. It establishes the credibility of the witnesses. But it doesn't say we found the wreckage, or does it? Sometimes what is missing from a file is just as important as what is in it. The fact that there is no follow-up memo saying false alarm, it was a meteor, is telling. In the bureaucratic world of the FBI, you always close the loop. You always file the case closed report. The absence of a debunking memo for the Sardine Canyon incident suggests the case wasn't closed. It was moved, taken out of the hands of the local field office and moved up the chain. And that brings us to the connection. This wasn't an isolated event. The skies over Utah had been busy for a long time. The document references an earlier investigation in Logan, Utah in September 1947. That is right. 2 years before the explosion, the same area was being circled. The 1947 report is even more bizarre. It wasn't just one object. Witnesses told the FBI they saw flying discs in formation, plural, circling the city. But here is the catch. They were circling at a high rate of speed. We are talking about 1947 technology. We had jets, but they were early. They were loud. They didn't fly in tight formations circling a city like Logan without everyone knowing exactly what they were, and they certainly didn't look like discs. The consistency here is chilling. Silver objects, discs, high speed, Utah. The FBI was building a file not because they believed in little green men, but because these objects were violating American airspace with total impunity. They were faster than our planes. They could maneuver in ways we couldn't. And now, in 1949, one of them had finally made a mistake. It exploded. The crash in Sardine Canyon gave the military something they desperately wanted: hardware. You can't reverse engineer a light in the sky. You need metal. You need wires. You need the falling object that the Army Guard saw drop into the mountains. The search for that object would have been intense, and if they found it, they would have taken it to the nearest secure facility. Or maybe they found it and realized they couldn't move it. This leads us to the cave theory. If the object crashed into a mountainous region, the easiest way to hide the debris quickly is to use the terrain. The caves in Utah are deep and dry, perfect for preservation. But the Utah incident is just one piece of the puzzle. To understand what they found in the mountains, we have to look at what they had already found in the desert. The documents in the vault don't just talk about Utah, they contain a smoking gun from a man named Guy Hottel. And his report makes the Sardine Canyon explosion look like a minor fender bender. What Hottel wrote down in 1950 creates a direct link between the crashes in the West and the technology the government was trying to hide. The Utah explosion proves they can crash. The Hottel memo proves what is inside them. The evidence points to a recovery mission that never ended. Inside the circular craft. If the Sardine Canyon memo is the smoke, the Guy Hottel memo is the fire. Guy Hottel was the special agent in charge of the Washington field office in 1950. He wasn't a low-level clerk. He was a man with access. On March 22, 1950, he typed up a memo with the subject line, "Flying Saucers." He sent it to the director. This single page is perhaps the most downloaded document in the FBI's history. And for good reason. It doesn't beat around the bush. It doesn't use vague language like unidentified phenomena. It gets straight to the point. Hottel reports that an Air Force investigator, whose name has been censored, stated that 3 so-called flying saucers had been recovered in New Mexico. 3, not 1, 3. This immediately changes the scope of the Roswell narrative. We are usually told about a single crash site, a lonely rancher finding some foil, but Hottel is talking about a squadron, a recovery of multiple craft. He describes them. They were described as being circular in shape with raised centers approximately 50 feet in diameter. Stop and visualize that. 50 feet. That is a massive object. That is roughly the size of a large house. A circular craft with a raised center. The classic flying saucer shape that pop culture has mocked for years. Yet here it is, described in a dry official government memo from 1950. But it gets worse. Or better, depending on how you look at it. Hottel didn't just describe the cars, he described the drivers. The memo states each one was occupied by 3 bodies of human shape, but only 3 feet tall. 3 feet tall. Human shape. This specific detail appears again and again in leaked reports from that era. Small stature, humanoid features, but clearly not human. The description of their clothing is even more fascinating. Hottel writes, the bodies were dressed in a metallic cloth of a very fine texture. Each body was bandaged in a manner similar to the blackout suits used by speed flyers and test pilots. This detail about blackout suits is incredible. In the late 40s and early 50s, human pilots were just starting to deal with G-forces in jet aircraft. We were developing pressure suits. For an alien species, or whatever they were, to be wearing similar technology implies they were dealing with extreme physics, extreme speeds, high G maneuvers. The metallic cloth of a very fine texture suggests a material science far beyond what we had in 1950. We didn't have fabrics that were both metallic and fine. Our pressure suits were bulky, rubbery, heavy things. These beings were wearing something advanced, something engineered. So we have 3 saucers, 9 bodies, all recovered in New Mexico. But here is the catch. Why did they crash? If these beings can travel across stars or dimensions, why are they slamming into the desert floor? Hottel has an answer for that too, and it is terrifying. The memo claims the saucers were found in New Mexico due to the fact that the government has a very high-powered radar setup in that area, and it is believed the radar interferes with the controlling mechanism of the saucers. Think about the implications of that sentence. We didn't shoot them down with missiles. We didn't hit them with bullets. We accidentally knocked them out of the sky with radar. In the late 40s, New Mexico was the heart of American military research. The atomic bomb was born there. White Sands Missile Range was there. We had the most powerful radar systems on the planet pointed at the sky to track our own rockets. If Hottel is right, the guidance systems of these flying saucers were sensitive to high-frequency radio waves. When they flew through our radar net, it scrambled their controls. They lost navigation. They crashed.